On tonight's Mark Steyn show, have you noticed an apparent uptick in young and middle-aged persons just suddenly dying? Oh, don't worry your pretty little head about it. The experts have a perfectly reasonable explanation. Ava Vlaardingerbroek's here to chew that one over in front of the palace. Under the very nose of the Queen Empress on the Victoria Memorial, the BBC showed its true colours when it comes to the Irish question. Kate Hoey will give us her thoughts. Plus, the stat man's back. Jamie Jenkins will dig into the NHS cancer numbers. And Alexandra Marshall notices Chinese air aces trying to start a war in the skies with Her Majesty's pilots. All that and your views live and in real time, so do send them along. gbviews@gbnews.uk, that's the email. You can Twitter me at gbnews. First, as always, the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Mark. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Officials in Berlin say 14 students were injured when a car drove into a crowd of people, killing their teacher. A German broadcaster reported that the teacher was accompanying a class of 10th grade students when she was struck. The 29-year-old German-Armenian driver has been detained. A state politician says posters relating to Turkey were found in the car. Actor John Barrowman happened to be in the area at the time. He told GB News what he saw.
One person was thrown onto a stretcher and other people were being CPR'd and treated, but it was carnage. We didn't find out until today that it was across the street where the Christmas market stuff had happened, but there were bollards all over the place to protect people from the cars, but the car was going so fast, one of those bollards exploded and all over the road.
Boris Johnson has faced questions in the Commons for the first time since surviving Monday's confidence vote, telling MPs he's getting on with the job. Although the Prime Minister won that vote, 41% of his own party said they had no confidence in him. It was prompted by the Sue Gray report into lockdown parties, but MPs are also unhappy with legislation to override the Northern Ireland Protocol and high taxes. Members of the Unite Union at Transport for London and London Underground have said they'll also strike on the 21st of this month. That's the same day as a walkout by the RMT. The Prime Minister had labelled the industrial action reckless and unwanted. The RMT plans to walk out on the 21st, 23rd and 25th of June, which they're calling the biggest strike on the railways since 1989. The planned strikes coincide with Glastonbury Festival and the Test match cricket. 2 British fighters have appeared in a Russian court to face charges of being mercenaries for Ukrainian forces. 28-year-old Aidan Aslin and 48-year-old Sean Pinner sat alongside a Moroccan fighter, Sordoun Brahim. If convicted, Mr Aslin faces up to 20 years behind bars. He's reportedly admitted to the offence of training in order to carry out terrorist activities. Mr Pinner could face the death penalty after allegedly admitting to seizing power by force. Police in London are hunting a man who absconded from a mental health facility. 48-year-old James Manley was last seen in Victoria Park in East London just after 11 a.m. this morning. He was convicted of a robbery 2 years ago and detained under the Mental Health Act. Police are advising the public not to approach him and, if they see the suspect, to call 999 immediately. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now let's get back to Mark Steyn.
Thank you, Ray. That's very interesting about the exploding bollard in Berlin, given that a response to terrorism is the bollardization of the entire Western world. The march of the monkeypox continues. The US Centers for Disease Control is now recommending Americans go back to wearing masks on public transport. If you're thinking, hang on, I thought you had to engage in intense penetrative sexual intercourse for at least 20 minutes to get a bad dose of the monkeypox. How many people are doing that even on the New York subway? Well, that was was last week. Now they're saying the monkeypox may have wiggled free of your dangly bits and could be airborne. If you're thinking of having sex on the New York subway, make sure you wear the protective mask. That'll keep you safe from the monkeypox. If you prefer, you can do it with a ginger growler. And who doesn't like to do it with a ginger growler? As you'll know, if you've watched this show regularly, we've touched in recent months on some curious, mysterious phenomena. For example, a striking number of footballers around the world keeling over on the pitch. Fit, healthy Australian celebrities dropping dead. Young and middle-aged persons in towns all over the UK doing likewise. This is such controversial stuff that I'm being investigated by Ofcom over it. Now, look at this. A 26-year-old man in Worcestershire, 26, Redditch, Worcestershire. A 42-year-old woman in Aberdeenshire. Both the mum and dad of a 10-year-old boy dying within a month of each other, in their early 40s. Now, you might think this is beginning to look like a pattern, a trend, but don't say that on social media or the fully credentialed fact checkers. Many of them have done modules in fact-checking at Rockall Polytechnic. These fully credentialed fact-checkers, such as Full Fact, which is fully funded by American bazillionaires to squash British free speech, they will get you labelled as misinformation, or, if you say it on telly, investigated by Ofcom. Fortunately, the experts have now figured out why all these hitherto healthy adults are dying well before they're 70. From the Daily Mail, healthy young people are dying suddenly and unexpectedly from a mysterious syndrome as doctors seek answers through a new national register. What is this mysterious syndrome that causes healthy adults to die suddenly? It's called sudden adult death syndrome. Seriously, sudden adult death syndrome, or SADS. And there's a lot of it about, quote, SADS is an umbrella term to describe unexpected deaths in young people, said the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, most commonly occurring in people under 40 years of age. So it's nothing to worry about. Sudden adult death syndrome is perfectly routine for someone of your age. What are the early symptoms? Well, it generally comes in three phases. You're an adult, you die, and it happens suddenly. So the good news is you won't be spending 2 years on an NHS waiting list. From the Daily Mirror, quote, Catherine Keane, 31, from Rathmines in Dublin, was found by her housemates after she failed to come down for breakfast, unquote. This is an absolutely horrible story. 3 young ladies sharing a flat, 2 of them in the kitchen thinking, gee, Catherine's taking her time getting up this morning, and eventually going in to find her dead. But not to worry, there is an official coroner's report, quote. The cause of her death was put down to sudden adult death syndrome. To which Dr. Mary Talley Bowden responds on Twitter, quote, this is a disease I have never heard of until now. Well, more fool you. Read the death certificate. The cause of her sudden death was sudden death. What part of that don't you understand? There's a lot of it going around. Maybe you should wear a mask. Maybe you should social distance. Now, I know what you cynical types are thinking. What's changed this last year and a half? Big change, big society-wide change. Now I think about it, what's changed is that in Dublin and in Aberdeen and Manchester and Redditch and Europe and North America and Australia and New Zealand, hundreds of millions of people underwent a medical procedure they had no medical reason to undergo, but they had plenty of non-medical reasons to get it. So for the first time in history, millions upon millions of people underwent a medical procedure in order to keep their jobs, in order to board a plane, to visit their family in an adjoining country in order to go to a Michelin restaurant with Andrew Neil on the Côte d'Azur, in order to see Bono in concert. Yeah. Don't go there, girlfriend. Follow the science, must follow the science. So let's follow the science all the way to Florida. Florida Surgeon General openly questioning safety of COVID-19 vaccines. I'm terribly sorry. That's my mistake. That's not the kind of science you're meant to follow. This Florida Surgeon General is obviously just some inbred, stump-toothed, knuckle-dragging, redneck, cracker, swamp-dwelling, rube, white supremacist conspiracy theorist. And while we're at it, pay no attention to Virology Journal, where Dr. Kenji Yamamoto is calling for an end to any more booster shots. This is interesting. It's in Virology Journal. That's a respected publication, peer-reviewed up the wazoo. According to European Medicines Agency recommendations, frequent COVID-19 booster shots could adversely affect the immune response and may not be feasible. These clinical alterations may explain the association reported between COVID-19 vaccination and shingles. As a safety measure, further booster vaccinations should be discontinued. No. Pay that no heed either. Sajid Jabbit's got your early autumn jab all lined up for you. Don't worry about picking up a dose of the sudden adult death syndrome. It's not as bad as it sounds. It's still far less likely to kill you than the monkeypox. Or shingles. Pay no attention to that line I just read about, quote, the association between COVID-19 vaccination and shingles. By sheer coincidence. Have you seen the new NHS advertising campaign? Shingles risk increases with age. Oh, but don't forget the small print there at the bottom. Other risk factors for shingles include having a weakened immune system. How about that? Meanwhile, in totally unrelated news from the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, the Food and Drug Administration's future framework for COVID vaccines, no more clinical trials will ever be needed for COVID vaccines if FDA adopts the proposed framework, which is modeled on the procedure for influenza vaccines. Every year, a new formulation of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines will be automatically approved and deemed safe and effective because it is biologically similar to existing shots, unquote. So no more tedious clinical trials for the next bunch of COVID vaccines. They'll simply be waved through the express check-in. I have the feeling we're going to get used to a lot more sudden adult death syndrome. It's just going around the way influenza used to. Let me know your view. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Our stat man is here, Jamie Jenkins, to look at some health statistics. But first, one of the sharpest commentators out there, Ava Valardinger, broke. Ava, I think you mentioned just on Twitter in the last day or two, this whole idea of having to get a medical intervention when you don't have a medical reason to get it. And you happen to notice some poor guy fell off a cliff on the Appalachian Trail, a tourist in America. And his mother would like to go to America and retrieve his body, but she's unable to.
Right. Yeah, this was a story of a 23-year-old Dutch hiker who was walking around the Appalachian Trail in America, and he fell off a cliff for, again, unknown reasons. But what is known is that his mother wants to go to the United States to come and bring her son's body home, and she is not allowed to go and do that because she doesn't have the vaccine. So she can go to pick up her son for this reason. And as you've mentioned, there are so many other things that people have been prohibited from doing because they didn't want to take a vaccine that they didn't need. So this is just, again, a story that's absolutely heartbreaking, and not just heartbreaking, quite frankly, it's evil.
Yeah, I think evil is the right word for this. I don't think there's a precedent. There's certainly no precedent on this scale for forcing hundreds of millions of people to have a vaccine they don't need. And certainly there's an element of hypocrisy too. This poor woman can't recover her son's body, while on the southern border of the United States, just as on the southern border of the United Kingdom, any number of unjabbed illegal immigrants can just walk into the country. So there are double standards here. But what I don't, get, this was a headline in Euro Weekly. Doctors baffled by increase in sudden adult death syndrome. I mean, are they that stupid, or are they just feel, we can't possibly connect all these dead young and middle-aged people over here with all these mass vaccinations over there? What they must know, surely.
Yes, I don't think that they're stupid. I think that they think we are stupid. And I mean, they're kind of right. I mean, sudden adult death syndrome, really? This is basically the new one. We had a couple of months ago, right, when it was Christmas, they said, there are a lot of people dying from heart attacks, and it might be because of the Christmas trees in your house. I've seen headlines where they said, it's climate change that now causes all of these heart attacks. I've seen post-pandemic stress disorder is causing heart attacks. These people are laughing at us. They think that we're stupid. And, the thing is that I understand that a lot of people have trouble saying these things because, as you said, they will come after you when you try and uncover the truth. And also, it's very hard to speak out about the truth and say, hey, maybe we should call a spade here, and 2 + 2 is 4. And the only thing that changed in the past couple of months is the fact that everyone took this vaccine. You can't say that because there are no real studies for these correlations. We just have suddenly all of these extra deaths. And we have no idea why, but we do know that it's not the vaccine. That's the one thing that they can tell you for sure. And I think there are plenty of reasons, understandable reasons, as to why they're trying to hide this truth from us.
Yeah, I'm absolutely amazed by this because you have to have a certain heartlessness. Normally with news, the problem with it is that it's overly sentimental. If you remember a couple of years ago when Angela Merkel admitted all those migrants into Germany, there was a dead baby who washed up on the Mediterranean shores. And that baby became the most famous baby in the world and became the image of what was going on and was the rationale for why Angela Merkel and everybody else had to let all these migrants in. Here we have this poor girl in Dublin. She's perfectly fit, she's perfectly healthy, she runs, she goes to the gym, and she's dead. And it's like we all agree we're not going to ask questions about why she's dead.
Exactly. It's horrible, and it really shows, once again, they don't really care about us. All of these talks about the deaths that we had to prevent with COVID, and that's why it was so necessary that you would take this vaccine. Well, they never talk about how many deaths were caused by the lockdown in and of itself. So it's very clear that these people really don't care about us whatsoever. And there are too many powerful institutions and stakeholders involved here that all have huge interest in us not knowing what the side effects are of this vaccine and what the dangerous consequences of these vaccines are and will be in the future. Obviously, our governments have forced this vaccine on us. You were basically a second-class citizen if you didn't take it. And, if it turns out that these governments have been giving citizens something that is forcing citizens to take something that is dangerous for their health, can you imagine the uproar that would cause? And, for them also, they would be losing power if that comes out. Big Pharma, it's very clear. The money that's involved in this is unfathomable. They want us to keep on taking these booster shots. Obviously, this is something they can make tremendous amounts of money from in the next couple of years to come. So we shouldn't know that this is dangerous for us. And even apart from the government and Big Pharma, just ordinary people, think about how many people have taken this vaccine and how hard it must be mentally to grasp the idea that you might have taken something that is bad for you and that could cause you all sorts of health problems in the future. And not just you, also your children. So the cognitive dissonance there is huge, and understandably so.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can't even wrap there are people, because if you can just go to sleep and not wake up in the morning, that's one of those thoughts that's basically too terrifying for a lot of people. Are you surprised at the way Western governments are still talking about more boosters? And in the US, for example, they're talking about a new shot that you won't have to take it every 3-6 months. It'll just be every year. But basically, their plan is that we should be getting these shots now and forever.
Yes. No, I'm not surprised anymore. After these past 2 years, I've been properly disillusioned. And I don't think that the government is my friend anymore. I'm baffled by the fact that a lot of people still think that the government is their friend. But of course, the governments want us to take this vaccine because, well, one of the many reasons, for example, is this digital ID that we've been talking about. If everyone has a vaccine, then everyone has a digital vaccine passport. And that gives huge opportunities for our governments to control us and to track us everywhere we go. So the benefits for them are huge. And, well, if you just hide the truth from people, they're not going to revolt against you anyway. So I don't see why they wouldn't want us to take more vaccines. It's just endless wins for them unless we wake up and say, well, you're not coming anywhere near my arm.
Yeah, you're not coming anywhere near my arm. You say you have no reason to get it, Ava. I don't think anybody under 50, 55, 62, whatever, should actually be contemplating this thing. The alleged benefit, with each passing month, the alleged benefits diminish further and further. And the risks of something really, the idea that you can have a thing called sudden adult death syndrome and people take that term seriously. We are the fools of human history. That is what's happening. So, as you say, keep your arm covered up and away from these guys, Ava. Great to see you, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much. We're going to get to your reaction next. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Plus, the waiting times at the NHS, they're skyrocketing for everything other than sudden adult death syndrome. And the BBC used to do great royal occasions rather well, but it all went to hell on the Jubilee. Stick with us, lots more to come. Hey, let's get to your take. Luna says, my partner passed away from SADS 12 years ago. He was only in his early 20s. He died in his sleep. He didn't have any vaccines, and he was a fit and active person. Charities and families affected by SADS have been campaigning for heart screenings for young people for years. And that's true, Luna. These things happen. They happen because very occasionally, because they're rare events. And as people in Australia, for example, where they're trying to come up with a national register, the problem is you can try and identify genetic causes of SADS, but they don't really know what genes cause SADS. So actually having everybody in a genetic database isn't going to make anything easier at all. The point, though, here, when we're having it put on death certificates, essentially as an easy opt-out for people, because it avoids awkward questions, we're getting into the realm of politicized medicine here, and that's extremely dangerous. And also, as I said, we should have the numbers about this. The SADS figures for 2021 aren't actually available anymore. Aren't actually available yet. All we know is that cases of it are being reported on a scale, which is why, doctors baffled by increase in sudden adult death syndrome. Doctors baffled. Isabel says, yeah, we should be paying attention to SADS because of the COVID vaccines produced by Big Pharma, their relationship with Big Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum, who openly declared on video they want to reduce the world population by 50% by 2023. Their reset agenda and how climate change and COVID are tools to get there. You know, here's the thing: whether Bill Gates wants to kill us all, I wouldn't be surprised. The richer you get, the more ambitious your schemes. That's entirely possible, and there is a streak of megalomania all over that crazy Davos thing. But here's the thing: you shouldn't actually be injected with stuff because you want to go to a West End show, you want to go to a sporting fixture, or whatever. That's not a reason to get stuff put in your arm, and we should dump that. This is a terrible thing, an experiment we've embarked on, and we shouldn't actually be experimenting on 7.5 billion people like this. Did you catch this bit at Prime Minister's questions?
And it's not just waiting for a GP, it's waiting for all NHS treatment. Take cancer. For over a decade, waiting times for cancer care have been going up. His solution was supposed to be diagnostic hubs. The Health Secretary has been on a victory lap this week. But here's the rub, Prime Minister. Since they were opened last year, 135,000 extra people are now waiting for scans and tests. Can he think of a better way to describe soaring cancer waiting lists than wanting and inadequate?
Ooh, Sir Keir really laid one on the PM there, didn't he? But we like to dig a little deeper into the numbers here, and when we do, we turn to our stat man, formerly with the Office for National Statistics, Jamie Jenkins. Jamie, what do you make of Sir Keir's numbers there?
Yeah, evening, Mark. I think, first of all, it's good actually to see Keir Starmer actually tackling the Prime Minister with proper issues rather than just Partygate. It was what we've seen in recent kind of months. And he chose most of his questions today, Mark, to look at the NHS and how the pandemic has hit the NHS waiting times. Now, ironically, he would have probably voted for longer and more stringent lockdowns, which probably, if he had been in charge, probably would have meant that we'd had even worse things. But there was a few things I noticed in the discussion today, Mark, and he was factually correct on a couple of things. I'll touch upon those. So basically what the NHS is, they have targets to try and get people who have an urgent referral, say from a GP, because there's some suspected cancer, for them to start treatment if they do actually have cancer within 2 months. Now, the NHS have got a target in England to get about 85% of people to meet that kind of target of getting the treatment started within 2 months. And in 2010, and in the first 4 years of the coalition government and David Cameron, they met that target, and they actually have stopped meeting that target since 2014. It's been falling down now, and in the year before the pandemic, only 77% of patients were getting that referral and getting the treatment started within 2 months. Now, so he's right to say today, Starmer, that it's got worse over the last 10 years. Now, through the pandemic, Mark, what we also saw in the first year of the pandemic, the number of people being referred falling down, because obviously we were all told to stay home, protect the NHS and save lives, forget about yourself kind of thing in terms of getting checked. And in the 12 months to March, it's dropped down even further. 12 months to March this year, 2022, dropped down even further to kind of 67%. So you might think, OK, it'll all be brilliant under Keir Starmer. But what he didn't talk about, I'm surprised Boris didn't really fight back on this. Maybe he was caught unawares in terms of what Keir would ask questions is. So Wales, where I live, just over the border from England, the health is devolved across the country. And if you look at the 2 month referral to treatment percentage in Wales, it's much lower. It's at 59%. So under a Labour-run administration within the UK, that's the only way we can do the comparison. It's actually worse in Wales than it is in England. So I think Boris missed a trick there to probably fight back with that. But Keir really, if he's trying to imply that Labour would run things better, the facts over in Wales don't show that.
Yeah, we forget that these are essentially, although we talk about it as a national health system, there's actually an English, Welsh, Northern Irish and Scottish health system, and they're all run as essentially as four separate things, effectively. But these are pretty shocking numbers. If, as you say, in Wales, only 58.7% start their cancer treatment within 2 months of a diagnosis. That would be regarded as unacceptable in most other types of health system, in Europe or in the United States, whichever way you wish to go.
No, indeed, Mark. And the important thing really in this is, obviously, when somebody is told they've got cancer, they immediately think, oh, I'm going to be dying of all of this. But cancer survival rates do differ significantly for obviously different cancers. And that early diagnosis and that early treatment, so it's not just the ones that we've talked about here who are waiting to start that treatment within 2 months. We know there are people missing in the system because of the lockdowns and struggling to get GP appointments that haven't been coming forward. Because what we do know is that, say, take breast cancer as a good example. If you get early diagnosis, it's what you would class as stage 1. So that's very early. You catch it. That's why we have the screening programs. Almost everybody who catches the cancer that way survives for 5 years. But if it's caught late and you get delayed in terms of your treatment, what you would class as stage 4 cancer, which is a late diagnosis, just 1 in 4 people survive. And the UK overall, Mark, fares pretty poorly when you compare to some other countries as well. If you take lung cancer, outcomes for patients in the UK are far worse than Australia and Canada. So you're right to say that, in any health system in the world, if you think there's 57% starting treatment, if you're talking 2 months, people probably, the day they diagnose, will want to start treatment the day after. Obviously, that's not possible. But comparable to other countries, the UK is pretty poor.
No, Rudy Giuliani, the former New York mayor who was on this show, has always said that if he'd got his prostate cancer diagnosis in the UK, he would be dead. He might be wrong about that, but that's certainly how he feels about it. Now, we've made everything worse, so that however bad the numbers were in 2019, they're way worse now because of the so-called Protect the NHS. What happened in northern Italy was that for the first 2 weeks of the COVID, the COVID hit and hospitals were overwhelmed, and 70, 80-year-old doctors and nurses came out of retirement to help out in the overwhelmed system, and they caught the COVID and they died. That was for 2 or 3 weeks. We are now 2 years into this thing, and basically the patient-doctor relationship, the access to hospitals, has still not got back to normal.
No, Mark, and the Attorney General in Wales last week was talking about it may take until 2030, and it'll be similar in the other 4 nations across the country as well. It may take till 2030 to get waiting list levels back to 2020 levels. Now, if I was talking to you a couple of years ago about the waiting lists in the UK in 2020, they weren't very good then. And we had a report actually, Mark, out, not from a pressure group or anybody. This was the NHS themselves last week, and they were looking at outcomes for diabetes patients. And because diabetes patients weren't coming forward or getting the usual checks that they would normally get through the pandemic, they estimated more than 3,000 extra deaths of people who had diabetes because they weren't getting the 8 standard checks that they've got, more than what you would have expected during the pandemic as well. So, we're starting to see that big fallout. Obviously, it was all about COVID for the last 2 years, but all these people, remember, I think the more important thing I'd probably say to the viewers, Mark, is that we've heard protect the NHS, save lives. People really got to start protecting themselves and saving their own lives and trying to get those appointments if they've got any niggles or any problems. It's difficult to get these appointments, but just keep fighting and trying to get through, because we know there are lots of people out there. They may be on a waiting list now. There's many people out there, Mark, as well, who are not on the waiting list yet because they don't know they've got something wrong with them yet.
Well, the protect the NHS thing, Jamie, was absurd fetishization. The idea that a backlog has been built up that will take till 2030 to clear is absolutely disgraceful. As you say, people have to look after themselves because in the end, they're not sentimental about you. You sit there on the Zoom call with your GP while your stage 2 cancer metastasizes into stage 4 and you're done. So banging your pots and pans on your doorstep to cheer the NHS isn't actually going to do anything for health in this country. Thank you very much, Jamie. It's always good to see you, and we'll look closer at more numbers next time. Even as everything else has deteriorated, the BBC still used to know how to do great royal occasions. From the most cobwebbed recesses of its glorious past would come swimming up ancient memories of Richard Dimbleby and Raymond Baxter, and if only for a couple of hours, it was almost 1953 all over again. Not anymore. The great occasion type coverage has gone the way of all the other stuff. At the big Jubilee concert, Doc Brown was delivering a paean to British sport, the sport that makes you proud to be British, whether you cheer the 3 lions, as he put it, the red dragon, the shamrock or the thistle. And as he spoke up, as you can see, up flashed the English lions, the Welsh dragon, the Irish tricolour and the Scottish salter. Wait a minute. The Irish tricolour? Are the lads from Dundalk and Kilkenny back in the Union? They've seen the error of their ways. The Dial in Dublin has figured the best way to ameliorate the Northern Ireland Protocol is for them to get the hell out of the EU too, as no self-respecting wearer of the green would ever entertain the notion that the answer to the Irish question is Michel Barnier. Well, no, apparently not. And yet, the BBC managed to mark the Platinum Jubilee by flying the Irish tricolour under the nose of Queen Victoria at Buckingham Palace. I'm sure RTE will reciprocate by flying the Union flag during its forthcoming observances of the Irish Free State Centennial. We're delighted to welcome Baroness Hoey back to the show. Kate, it is difficult to believe that this was a good faith error.
Well, I think it was first noticed immediately by one of the Northern Ireland newspapers, the Belfast Newsletter, who immediately put it onto Twitter. And then, of course, everyone started to notice as well and look back on it. I think a lot of people probably watching this will simply say, oh, well, that was just a mistake and so what, and they didn't really mean it. I'm afraid for those of us who've got a little bit more critical about the BBC and the way it has behaved generally on issues to do with Northern Ireland, and particularly BBC Northern Ireland, who I think there are a lot of problems with. But I think for the national BBC, to make such a dreadful mistake as that really needs some questions asked of why it could happen, who was responsible, has anyone actually been challenged about it? Because the problem is, Mark, it's not the first time. There was something happened, I think it was just over a year ago, or maybe 2 years now, where the wrong flag was used when there was a morning programme and there was something about the weather came up and Northern Ireland was portrayed with the tricolour. Now, again, people might say, oh, so what? And why are you getting so upset about flags? But, in Northern Ireland context, it's actually quite important, flags, and the flag of our own country being portrayed wrongly by the BBC, who Northern Ireland people have to pay the licence fee to as well, did make people very angry. And although there was an apology, I'm not sure that anyone really has been challenged as to why it happened and how it could have happened.
Well, it's been many, many decades since I was inside a BBC building, but certainly at Broadcasting House and Television Centre in the old days, almost everybody in departments totally unrelated to the politics of it. It was generally, people worked on arts programmes were all generally in favour of a united Ireland. I don't believe for a moment that this thing of inserting the Irish tricolour into a montage about the four constituent nations of the UK. And the Red Hand of Ulster, by the way, is a great flag. It's a very distinctive and memorable flag. I don't believe that this is something that just some junior intern accidentally does. I think there's got to be at least half a dozen people who saw this and waved it through.
Well, I'm afraid I have to agree with you in that. And, I don't like saying that because it does look like you're some kind of, vendetta against the BBC. But these kinds of ways that Northern Ireland pro-union people are treated generally on a number of issues is very clear that there's a lot of people inside the establishment of the BBC who, for whatever reason, actually think Northern Ireland's not very important, don't really like unionists, have a sort of stereotypical view of them. And that comes about then when no one was able to discover this, if it was a mistake, and if it was deliberate, then really that, I think, is something that needs to be absolutely challenged. Actually, I tried to put down a question today in Parliament about what was the government going to do to ensure that the BBC, who we all pay for, understood the difference between the flag of Northern Ireland and the flag of the Republic of Ireland. Unfortunately, that wasn't allowed to be tabled because it's not actually something that the government is responsible for. So I didn't get very far with that. But I think, although there was an apology, it wasn't really a very strong apology, and certainly we haven't seen any repercussions inside the BBC that this couldn't happen again.
Well, as you say, everybody pays for the BBC. And this isn't just like some alternative comedy show or whatever going a little rogue. This is the reason we have a BBC, is to mark, in this case, a great national, a great Commonwealth occasion. And it surely can't just be that they can make mistakes like this and remain the national broadcaster.
Came on top of what we'd had the previous week. One of the biggest ever turnout of people in Northern Ireland for our centenary, 100 years in 2021, a huge procession which was cancelled a year ago because of COVID. And the BBC gave it a tiny little amount of coverage on the main BBC Northern Ireland news. And I don't think it got a word of coverage on the national news. And, if that had been happening in Scotland or in Wales, and certainly happening in England, there would have been a lot of publicity. So people are quite annoyed about it. The problem is most people in Northern Ireland, have got so used to being treated like this that they kind of almost say, oh, well, what do you expect from the BBC? But I think we need to expect a lot more from the BBC, and which is why many of us are continuing to criticise them for their biased nature of some of their coverage, and why more and more people are turning, if I have to say, to GB News, who have really, with their correspondent from Northern Ireland, covered so much more about Northern Ireland than anything that the BBC does.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Kate. It's much appreciated. It's a horrible thing to think of this border down the Irish Sea for, everything from baked beans to cornflakes, but that it should actually extend culturally and in terms of your identity on a great national occasion is disgraceful. Thank you very much for that, Kate Hoey, and I hope you do get to ask your question in Parliament because as I said, if the BBC were just like GB News or some of these other channels, fine, do what you want, make your case and see how many people buy it. But that's not what they are, and we all pay for it. Thank you very much, Kate. Always great to see you. Stump the Steyn looms. You can tweet me at GB News, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Also coming up, our favourite Australian, Alexandra Marshall, is here. Don't go away. It's China's world. We just pay for it. They're buying up the Commonwealth island by island. They're buying up the natural resources of entire continents. So it's no surprise they're extending their Belt and Road initiative to the very heavens. The other day, a Chinese fighter jet intercepted a Royal Australian Air Force plane over the South China Sea, forcing the Aussie pilot to take evasive action. Meanwhile, across the planet, other Chinese fighter jets have been buzzing planes of the Royal Canadian Air Force and diverting them from their flight paths. Australia's new PM, President-in-waiting Albanese, and Canada's longtime blackface mammy singing Prime Minister Jacinda Trudeau have condemned these provocations, but being swatted by a third-rate mammy singer doesn't seem to bother Chairman Xi. Alexandra Marshall from The Spectator Down Under joins me. What do you make of this, Alexandra?
Well, we've got a brand new Prime Minister, and he's a Labor Prime Minister, and our new Defence Minister is famous for taking trips on the Chinese dollar. So no doubt Beijing and Xi Jinping have decided to test Australia just to see how strong we really are going to be pushing back on the whole Taiwan issue. And so what do we have? We have warplanes coming in and buzzing our AAAF jets straight away. And this comes only a short time after we had Taiwan's biggest incursion, where China flew a whole stack of planes into Taiwanese airspace looking for a conflict or an accident. And this whole thing is about making the South China Sea so dangerous for Western aircraft that the West just doesn't fly anything in there. And so without aircraft in the South China Sea, China can continue its little program of militarizing coral atolls and creating little bases off its Asian friends. And so that's what this is really about. And the question is, will Labor, who's China-friendly, actually stand strong against this kind of military incursion?
Well, Labor has had the opportunity to be China-friendly for about a fortnight or whatever it is now, because they're a new government. In Ottawa, Justin Trudeau's been friendly to the Chinese. I forget what the exact way. He said he admired their basic dictatorship. He's actually been super cozy to them for the best part of a decade, and the RCAF still get buzzed by these Chinese planes. Do you think the Chinese are actually hoping just to drive Western air forces out of the skies? That's the basic plan. So people say it's not worth the agony, let's just stand down.
Well, they do exactly the same thing with the shipping lanes. They try and create these close calls because the West is absolutely terrified of ending up in an accidental situation where something goes wrong and shots are fired that shouldn't be, and you sort of wander or stumble into World War III. That's what they're terrified of. So China manufactures all these incidents to make the rest paranoid, basically. They're trying to get them to just leave entirely because they're hoping that the West is more afraid of a war than it is of policing the territory of these what are supposed to be international waters and international airspaces. So, yes, it is about trying to gain control without really deserving it.
Yeah, because just to follow up on what you were saying, clearly if an Australian or Canadian plane was downed, even the squishiest governments would feel they were obliged to react to that somehow. And yet the one thing Chairman Xi knows about Canberra and Ottawa is that those guys don't want to have to react at all.
Yeah, well, the thing is that plane incident we had with Australia, the Chinese jet actually released flares, which showered the aircraft in pieces of aluminium. Now, that can down an aircraft if it goes wrong. And so then the Australian Air Force is in a really difficult position because if China downs an aircraft, you should retaliate. But can you retaliate against a communist empire that is actually wanting a war there in the Pacific so they can take Taiwan? And if Australia doesn't react, well, then the West is put in a weakened position against China generally. So it's a really tricky situation that the West wants to avoid, and China is deliberately trying to make happen. So yes, you're totally right.
There is supposedly a thing called the AUKUS Alliance. I don't suppose Mr. Albanese regards it as a very real thing. That's Washington, London and Canberra. Is there any expectation that Joe Biden, as the so-called leader of the free world, would demand an end to these provocations?
Well, Australia was basically told they had to sign up to this agreement because we were not doing enough on defence and we were becoming the weak link in the Pacific. So as much as the Labor Party's followers and supporters don't seem to like AUKUS, and particularly the Greens, who now make up a really scary amount of our parliament, they don't want AUKUS. I think that Labor has, at least after its defence briefings, realised that they require AUKUS to survive because things are far more serious than they realise in the Pacific. And I think that's going to strengthen, even though Labor doesn't like the idea of collaborating with the US. I think it's dawned on them they've got no choice in this matter because things are really quite bad. And we've seen total 180 from our foreign minister. Penny Wong's gone from, oh, we can sort of hug it out with China to, oh, maybe we can't. Maybe that doesn't work with communist dictators.
That's true. Well, that's an encouraging thought that they've had the briefing, so they got a little less idiotic about this stuff. Thank you very much, Alexandra. It's always great to see you. Let's stump it out for the last minute or so. Brian says, evening, Mark. I was wondering if you could explain why the so-called asylum seekers are receiving legal aid. They're not citizens of this country and have not paid a penny in tax or national insurance. Why are they receiving legal aid? Because you are suckers, not just particularly the UK, but all Western nations on this subject. Suckers. John says, could you give us a rendition of the Funky Gibbon, which was top of the pops in the 1970s for the goodie? I haven't heard this song in however many decades. Do, the Funky Gibbon. Funky Gibbon, we are here to show you how. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Okay.